we are starting the main goal of our project. We're going to take an example module called example.py, and that's a module which does user authentication against some hard-coded data which is written inside of a module, and some data like a list of calls it just generates randomly. So that's obviously not what we need in real life, and we're going to change it to make it work with a real FreePBX system. A disclaimer, I'm not going to wait you while I type the code, it will take too long. So I do have a code, I developed it, I tested it, so I'm going to copy, paste small pieces of it and I'll be explaining. It will be much faster, but trust me, there is no magic. That's a code which I wrote just a few minutes ago. So first of all, let's clean up our example module a little bit. We don't need Faker. That's a class which was used to generate some random data like random phone numbers, and we're getting rid of it. We don't support one-time passwords for now, so we're going to remove that as well. And this whole made-up things, a class for generating things, we don't need either, right? So we are going to skip it. And so our connector, we're going to make it named FreePBX connector, and of course we're changing the description. So for now, we're not going to be supporting one-time password login, although it's fairly simple to add. Most importantly, we don't support retrieval of past calls or call recordings. And for CDRs, perhaps there is an API method which allows to do that. I'm just not aware of it. But it's not that important again, because for now, it is just for testing purposes. Okay. So I'm replacing the code which was there with my code, and let's take a look at that. So what do we have here? Well, so we're changing the constructor, and here our goal is to retrieve some configuration values. And there is a module called app class and app_config in the module app_config, which provided information. It will retrieve them from environment variables, which is good when you are running in a Docker environment, or maybe from configuration files, so we don't have to worry about that. The important thing is we need to have these values when we will be starting our program. And for now, for testing, I just have them configured here in for my launch.json file. Okay, and good idea to save it as under a different name, right? So we don't want to accidentally override our example file. Okay, here's some important component. As you can see, I'm creating an object of FreePBX API. What is it, FreePBX API, and where does it come from? Well, majority of integrations you will be doing with FreePBX or some other systems will communicate with those through some type of HTTP-based API. It can be REST, in case of FreePBX it's GraphQL, but it's about the same. So for your convenience, we have HTTP API module, which provides an abstract class for easy communication with remote system. So it provides, for instance, a method send REST request, which fills the parameters, does the login, and does all those things. So it will be much simpler. Okay, so let's take a look then what do we need to add in our FreePBX module. Well, first of all, let's actually from HTTP API we import a class HTTP API connector with login. That's type of interface where you first have to do login operation, basically to obtain an access token to be used for the rest of the session, and then you do normal operations. Okay, and here's the class which we have. So it's derived from a class. In the constructor, we obtain the server hostname where we'll be sending our request, our API user, API password. In case of FreePBX, they're called client ID and client secret. Right? We have a parameter. This is the URL where we'll be sending our normal GraphQL requests. Okay, and here we change this module so we will know how to do the login. There's an URL or path where we need to send a request to the token, and if this login is successful, we need to know from which structure to extract that token from, where does it come in the response. And here's the method which we implementing, because for each instance it's going to be unique how to perform a login operation. So just sending post request to this path which we defined above here. We pass in parameters as we're supposed to, and if everything is correct, if we got the successful result, and if we find the excess token in the reply, then we memorize it for future use, because obviously we don't want to log in every time. The token usually is valid for 1 hour or more, so we'll be using it as long as we can. And if we get here, something is wrong. Right? Okay, but another thing which we need to do in this class, so to send in subsequent requests, this authentication information, access token, has to be provided to the server somehow. And again, it may depend from server to server. For instance, here, it's more or less the standard. It's sent in the authorization header as a bearer token. But for some other system, for instance, SignalWire, they just want to do basic authentication to be sent in a different header. Right? So what add authentication info does, it takes a dictionary of parameters to be passed to request function and returns a copy or changed copy of it. In this case, we're just adding authorization header. This is probably going to be what most of you will be using. Okay. And now we have a few specific functions to our GraphQL API for WebTrit. So it looks like when we send in a request, for instance, we need to see all of the extensions. This is a GraphQL query. When we send to the server, this is the structure we are going to receive. So here we define GraphQL queries as text, and then is a function get specific extension that defined by user ID. And here we just replacing in the query this user ID with the actual parameter, send the request. If everything fine, then we do actually another query, because in FreePBX PBI, at least during my test, I couldn't figure out how to retrieve attribute called password through GraphQL, but I was able to retrieve voicemail password. So that's good enough for our tests. We send another request and merge these two dictionaries and return as a user data. And something similar to query all extensions, a GraphQL query, which we send, and we extract only the useful part of this response, which is this list, and we return here. That's about it. So that's our service class FreePBX API, right? So back to our FreePBX connector class, we create an instance of FreePBX API object and the rest. And for storing sessions, we use the file session storage. That's the default one, which we have already supplied with this as connector application. Also, what else do we have in our class? Well, this method name, which returns the name of our connector. It will be returned to WebTrit, so it knows what it connects to. Version, that's our version 0.11. Okay, then the important thing, get capabilities. That's a method which is called by WebTrit to know what actually we can expect. For instance, since we don't support login via OTP passwords, we don't return it. We don't include here. The same thing applies for call history. So we're saying the only thing we support for now, it's login using username and password for an end user and getting a list of extensions, which is fine. Given the next method, it's authenticating the user. So when the user tries to log in with the username and password, we have to validate it, and if everything's fine, create a new session. So this is what is happening here. We call function from our API client to get information about extensions. So we get dictionary of data. We'll look at the information about password, compare it with the password provided by the user. If everything's fine, again, it's a built-in functions to create a session and return it. Otherwise, we return an error. So it's invalid password or just some other type of authentication errors. Like we don't implement functions related to OTPs, get extension information. Also, since we'll just define the function of get extension data, we just call it get dictionary. This is a function I'll cover in a few seconds. It's basically which converts, again, these fairly complex structures as provided, as returned by the API into actual WebTrit object. And if user wasn't found, again, we just raise an exception, so WebTrit will get HTTP 404 error code. Retrieve contacts, similar, we get dictionary, a list of dictionaries, and then we convert them to objects, and retrieve call record are not implemented. So this is a function where most of the business logic resides, and that's actually you will be spending most of your time when creating new modules, because we have to work with the JSON structure we receive from the server, extract the necessary parameters such as what's the extension name, is there a phone number attached to it, is there an email, and so on. And then we're going to convert it into either end user object, which represents data about the user who's actually logged into the system, or represent information about other extensions in the system, which is represented by the contact info. Okay, and looks like I'm missing a few imports here, which I would need from our BSS models. So let's fix it. Schema, this. Okay. So let's start our application. Started successfully. And now we want to see if it actually works.